Hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to share with you our focus on Mega Goal 2.2. We will be exploring Unit 5, which is all about working 9 to 5, including its form, meaning, and function. In this session, we'll cover key concepts about workplace routines, the significance of work hours, and how language reflects professional environments. So, let's get started and dive into this interesting topic together. Now let's take a closer look at the key points on this slide. First, we'll focus on how to form correct tag questions. These are those short questions at the end of a statement, like "You're coming, aren't you?" They're useful for confirming information and making conversations more engaging. Next, we'll explore how to ask for information using can, could, and would. These modal verbs help us inquire politely or make requests, depending on the situation. For example, asking, "Can you help me?" or "Could you tell me the time?" Then, we'll see how to make requests with can, could, and would. These are polite ways to ask someone for assistance or favors without sounding too demanding. Moving on, we'll cover expressing obligation with must, mustn't, and have to. These help us communicate what is necessary or forbidden, like "You must finish your work," or "You mustn't smoke here." Finally, we'll learn how to express necessity and the lack of necessity with phrases like have to, needn't, don't have to, and don't need to. These give us a nuanced way to talk about what's required or optional, such as "You need to submit the report," or "You don't need to bring anything." By mastering these points, you'll be better equipped to communicate clearly and politely in various situations. Let's talk about how we form tag questions in English. On this slide, you can see a few examples. First, notice the short form, which is not. For example, in the sentence, "He is not," we can make a tag question by turning it into "Isn't he?" This is a common way to confirm information or seek agreement. Now, moving to positive sentences, like "He is," the tag question becomes "Is he?" Or more naturally, "Isn't he?" The key is that the auxiliary verb in the tag matches the main verb in the sentence, but it's reversed and contracted for ease. In the case of negative sentences, such as "He is not," the tag question would be "Is he?" Without the not, because the negative form in the sentence influences the positive form in the question. Here's an important point. When creating a tag question, we typically follow a pattern. For affirmative sentences, the tag is usually negative, and for negative sentences, the tag is positive. Let's look at this example. "She is our English teacher, isn't she?" Notice how the statement is positive, and the tag is negative. This pattern helps us check information or invite confirmation in conversation. So the subject comes first, then a comma, followed by the auxiliary verb, which is contracted in the tag. Remember, the auxiliary verb in the tag agrees with the main verb in the sentence. Finally, see the example at the bottom. The form of a tag question is basically the structure we follow, affirmative or negative, depending on the sentence, with the auxiliary verb and the subject. Keep practicing this pattern, and it'll become second nature in your conversations. Let's take a closer look at negative sentences and how we form them. When we want to say something is not true or not the case, we use a negative sentence. For example, instead of saying "She is our English teacher," we say "She isn't our English teacher." Notice how we add the word not to make it negative. Now, when we turn these negative sentences into questions, especially tag questions, we need to understand the form of the negative statement first. The key is to keep the subject and auxiliary verb consistent. For example, in the sentence, "She isn't our English teacher," the auxiliary verb is. When forming the tag question, we add a short question at the end, like "Is she?" But because the sentence is negative, the tag becomes positive. So it becomes "She isn't our English teacher, is she?" This pattern is very important. Notice how the negative statement is followed by a positive tag. It's a common structure in English that helps us check information or confirm something. And remember, the subject always stays the same, and the auxiliary verb in the tag always matches the auxiliary in the main sentence, but it's turned into the positive form if the main sentence is negative. So to sum up, Negative sentences with auxiliary verbs are the foundation, and the tag question turns the statement into a question by adding a short, positive question at the end. This is a key concept, especially when we're trying to make our questions sound natural and conversational. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. When using tag questions, a key point to remember is that if the main clause contains an auxiliary verb, you should use the same auxiliary verb in the tag question. For example, if the sentence is negative, like, "She isn't a lovely person," the tag question will also be negative. "Isn't she?" This consistency helps keep the question clear and grammatically correct. Now, if the sentence is affirmative, such as, "She is a lovely person," then the tag question becomes positive too, like, "Isn't she?" This pattern makes it easier to confirm or check information in a natural, conversational way. It's important to note that the form of the tag question depends on the auxiliary verb in the main clause, whether it's positive or negative. For negative main sentences, use negative tags, and for positive main sentences, use positive tags. This rule ties into the overall theme of understanding how auxiliary verbs shape sentence structure, especially in question forms. Mastering this makes your spoken and written English more accurate and fluent. Now, let's talk about a key point in forming questions and negatives in the present simple and past simple tenses. When there is no auxiliary verb used in a sentence, we need to add do, does, or did to make it correct. This helps to turn a statement into a question or a negative form properly. For example, if the sentence is negative and there's no auxiliary verb, we say, "No, she doesn't," which means she does not do that. When we want to ask a question, we add does and invert the subject, like, "Does she eat the cake?" In positive statements, if there's no helping verb, we just confirm it directly. For example, "She eats the cake," and then to form a question we say, "Does she eat the cake?" Remember, in the negative, we use doesn't for she, he, or it. In the affirmative, we use does. And in the past simple, we use did for all subjects. So the most important concept here is that whenever there's no auxiliary verb in the sentence, we must insert do, does, or did to correctly form questions and negatives. This is essential for proper grammar and clear communication. It connects to our overall theme of understanding how to structure sentences correctly in different tenses. Now, let's take a closer look at some common question tags and how they work with different sentences. First, we have did they, which we use to ask about past actions or states involving they. Next, doesn't she is used when we want to confirm something about a present action or characteristic of she, with a negative form. Then, isn't she is similar but used with the verb to be in the present tense, again seeking confirmation. Following that, aren't they is for asking about a plural subject in the present, again with a negative question tag. Now, let's see how these fit into real sentences. We have they are best friends, and to turn this into a question, we add aren't they. So the full question is they are best friends, aren't they? Similarly, she cleans the room becomes she cleans the room, doesn't she? Note that for this sentence, the auxiliary does is used in the tag. Next, they didn't buy many clothes turns into they didn't buy many clothes, did they? Here, because the sentence is in the past tense with didn't, the tag asks, did they? Finally, she is a good cooker becomes she is a good cooker, isn't she? Using is for the present tense and the negative form in the tag to confirm the statement. The key takeaway is that we form tag questions by matching the auxiliary or modal verb in the main sentence and adjusting the polarity, positive or negative, accordingly. This skill is essential because it helps us check information, seek confirmation, or encourage conversation naturally. So, mastering these tags makes your English sound more fluent and conversational, which is a core part of effective communication. Now, let's talk about polite ways to make requests and ask for information. When we're communicating, especially in professional or formal settings, it's important to be courteous and respectful. Using polite phrases helps to create a positive interaction and shows consideration for the other person's time and effort. For making requests instead of demanding, we might say, "Could you please?" or "Would you mind?" These expressions soften the request and make it sound more polite and less direct. Similarly, when asking for information, phrases like "May I ask?" or "Could you tell me?" are effective. They show respect and give the other person a sense of control over the conversation. Remember, the way we phrase our requests can significantly impact how they're received. Incorporating polite language not only fosters good relationships, but also aligns with the overall theme of effective communication. It's about being clear, respectful, and considerate in all our interactions. So let's take a closer look at some common ways we express possibility and ability. First, we have would, which is often used to talk about hypothetical situations or polite requests. It's a very useful word when we're imagining what might happen or asking someone nicely. Next, we see do repeated twice. This highlights how we use don't to express negation, especially when talking about what we or others are not willing to do or what isn't allowed. It's simple but powerful in everyday conversations. Then we come to can and could. These are key modal verbs that help us talk about ability and possibility. Can is used for present ability, like "I can swim," while could is more about past ability or polite permission, such as "Could you help me?" or "I could run faster when I was younger." Throughout this slide, the main idea is understanding how these words help us shape our meaning, whether we're discussing what is possible, what isn't, or what might happen. Connecting this back to our overall theme, mastering these expressions allows us to communicate more effectively and confidently in various situations. Let's talk about the difference between mustn't and had to. First, mustn't means you're not allowed to do something. It's a rule or a prohibition. For example, you mustn't smoke in the building. It's not permitted. It's important to note that mustn't is a present tense, so there's no past tense form. You can't say mustn'ted. Instead, if you're talking about something you were not allowed to do in the past, you use had to. For example, if you wanted to say that in the past you weren't allowed to park here, you'd say, "I had to park somewhere else." Or, "We had to leave early because of the rules." Now let's look at some practical examples. If you must stop at a stop sign, that's a rule you follow now. But if last week you weren't allowed to park in a certain spot, you'd say, "I had to find another parking space." So remember, must and have to are used for present obligations, and their past tense, had to, describes what was necessary or allowed in the past. Mustn't is always about restrictions happening now, no past tense form. This helps us understand how to speak about rules and obligations clearly in different time frames, which is key for effective communication in professional settings. Let's look at some common words we use to talk about obligations and permissions. On this slide, we'll focus on must and mustn't, which are very useful for giving clear instructions or rules. For example, Muslims must pray 5 times a day. This shows a strong obligation. Then we have mustn't, which means you are not allowed to do something. For instance, you mustn't arrive late to work. Punctuality is important in many settings. Now let's practice completing these sentences. You must stop here. The sign says no parking, so you shouldn't park in this area. We also have can and could, which are more about permission or possibility. Can is used for present ability, like, "Can I leave early today?" And could can be used for polite requests or past ability. Understanding these words helps us communicate rules, permissions, and possibilities clearly. Remember, must and mustn't are about rules we follow, while can and could are more about asking for or giving permission. This is essential in both everyday conversations and more formal contexts. Now let's look at some useful phrases for talking about arrangements and obligations. On this slide, we see the phrase, "We will need to book an airport taxi." This is a way to express that it's necessary for us to make that booking. Next, we have "we will have to book an airport taxi." This also indicates necessity, but sometimes have to is a bit stronger or more formal. Both phrases help us communicate that booking the taxi is something we are obliged to do. Moving on, I want to highlight the difference between I needn't translate it and I don't need to translate it. These two are similar but slightly different in usage. I needn't is a contraction of need not, meaning it's not necessary for me to translate it. On the other hand, I don't need to also means it's not necessary, but it's more common in everyday speech. Finally, we see I need to finish a report for work, and I have to finish a report for work. Both express obligation, but have to is often used to talk about external requirements or rules, while need to can sometimes be more about personal necessity. Remember, need and don't have to are used to show that something is not necessary. Connecting this to our overall theme, mastering these expressions helps us communicate obligations and necessities clearly in English, especially in professional and travel contexts. All right, let's go through some important points about road safety and rules today. First, you mustn't or must not park here. It's crucial to understand which areas are designated for parking and which are not, to avoid fines or blocking traffic. Next, you mustn't or must not overtake on this road. Overtaking can be risky, especially in areas with limited visibility or where it's prohibited. Always look out for signs and road markings that indicate whether overtaking is allowed. Then, you must not drive faster than 70. Remember, adhering to the speed limit of 70 is essential not only to avoid penalties, but also to keep everyone safe. Speed limits are set for a reason. They help prevent accidents and ensure smooth traffic flow. Finally, you must not drive down this road if it's restricted or one way in a different direction. Always pay attention to signs that tell you whether you can or cannot proceed. Following these rules helps us all stay safe and respectful of traffic laws. Connecting all these points, the key message is that understanding and obeying road signs and regulations is vital for safe driving and responsible road use. All right, let's wrap things up with some practical application. On workbook page 273, you'll find the exercise labeled MO This is your homework, and it's designed to help reinforce what we've covered today. I encourage you to work through these exercises thoroughly, as they're a great way to solidify your understanding. Remember, the key points we've discussed are not just theoretical, they're skills you can apply in real-world situations. So take your time, connect the concepts we've talked about, and see how they fit into the bigger picture of your learning journey. This practice will help you internalize the material and prepare you for future challenges. Thanks for engaging actively today. You're doing great.